The coalition on track to reunite after a messy split. 11th hour talks see both Liberal and National leaders give ground to achieve peace. Meanwhile, rising interest rates put pressure on the Treasurer, who joins me this morning. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. For millions of households, Tuesday's interest rate rise was an unwelcome start to the year. For the Treasurer, it presents a whole new challenge. Government spending may not be the biggest driver of inflation, but even the Reserve Bank Governor says it is a factor. Not that Labor appeared too troubled in Parliament, as the drama on the Conservative side of politics drags on. This morning, a breakthrough. After an 11th hour compromise, the Liberals and Nationals are both giving ground and look set to reunite. Susan Lee has agreed to a shorter suspension for those dropped from her front bench.
Order.
Susan Lee and David Littleproud will meet tonight.
Following today's failed coup in the Nationals party room.
David Littleproud is still the leader.
The coalition could reform this week, but the three senators that crossed the floor would be suspended from shadow cabinet for 6 months.
That can happen this week with those conditions underscored.
That's the Liberal leader's arbitrary deadline.
One Nation now has a higher primary vote than the former coalition partners.
They're so desperate they've got to vote for Pauline Hanson.
And I think ambition is a good thing.
Have you been working the phones? Have you been having any discussions with your colleagues?
Well, of course I've been having discussions with colleagues about the future of the party.
Well, no one has rung me and said we need to change the leader.
I note that Married at First Sight begins tonight. It's a bit like that with the relationships on the other side. You know they're going to end badly.
But I would urge Mr Albanese to stop watching maths and to tune in the Governor of the Reserve Bank.
Thank you all for coming.
A sharp U-turn on the rates roller coaster.
The board decided to raise the cash rate by 25 basis points.
This will be difficult news for millions of Australians with a mortgage.
Now, I know this is not the news that Australians with mortgages want to hear, but it is the right thing for the economy.
The Prime Minister took credit for rate cuts last year.
Record government spending is adding to inflationary pressures.
Treasurer, as mortgage holders are hit with their 13th interest rate rise under Labor,
will he now take responsibility for the rate rise today?
Will you now finally take responsibility?
One of those things I take responsibility for is cleaning up the mess that was left to us by those opposite.
That there has to be an external audit of what has gone wrong under Jim Chalmers' watch.
This is a direct consequence of his spending spree.
The opposition swipes are failing to hit home, overshadowed by the coalition's bitter split.
Imagine being elected to represent the community and you come to Canberra and talk about yourself.
The Liberal Party is a dead brand in Australia.
Well, I'm back. You can kick me out, you can dismiss me or try to silence me, but you can't stop me.
They're just focused on each other. Liberals focused on other Liberals, Nats focused on other Nats, and now talk of a three-way coalition with Pauline Hanson.
Order.
Well, let's bring in our panel. Joining us this morning, political journalist and author Karen Middleton, economics editor for the Australian Financial Review John Kehoe, and Paul Sakkal, the chief political correspondent for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Very good morning to all of you. Paul, let's start with the breaking news this morning, the coalition reuniting. You wrote about this in today's paper. What I've been told this morning from Liberals and Nationals, it'll now be a 6-week rather than a 6-month suspension for those three Nationals. But it applies to all of the Nationals who quit in solidarity, although the Nationals are saying, well, it works out at only 5 weeks. When you add it all up, the time served. Either way, it is a concession from Susan Lee on that front, and from David Littleproud. The Nats will agree to shadow cabinet solidarity. The Nats can't overrule shadow cabinet. Only the joint party room of Liberals and Nationals can. That's going to be codified, put in writing to give some assurance after, 2 splits now in less than a year.
I mean, even those details you just mentioned, 5 or 6 weeks, just the ridiculousness and pettiness of some of these counter-offers and conversations that have been going on. Meanwhile, the kind of tectonic plates of politics are shifting underneath the Liberal Party and they're fighting over Canberra conventions that voters have very little understanding of. It's just been a pretty absurd process. But There has been a 180 over the last 48 hours. On Thursday, it appeared, and all the noises coming out of Susan Lee's camp with it was that on Sunday, being today, they would go it alone and announce a Liberal-only frontbench and formalise the split. The moderates were behind her. This was seen as a way Susan Lee could galvanise her own numbers. She was projecting strength against the Nationals, but pressure really built on her over Friday and Saturday. David Littleproud came back with another offer which said that, OK, we won't accept 6 months of suspensions, but we will accept 6 weeks. So we will acknowledge that we have done something wrong, which is a big concession that allows Lee to say she has punished the 3 rebels. And Liberals, including Angus Taylor and James Patterson, James McGrath, Dan T, and so key members of the leadership group were pushing very strongly to get this deal done. And there was speculation on Friday and Saturday that Angus Taylor, the leadership rival, would on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday quit the front bench should Lee formalise the split and precipitate a spill next week. So pressure rose on Lee. Littleproud also under immense pressure to get a deal done. They're both back down. They both win some and lose some, and now we get this fragile coalition back together.
Well, they've both clearly come to the conclusion that, yes, there are problems in coming back together and trust issues and all of that, but it's worse to remain separated. You touch on the different views within the Liberal Party as to whether it would be better to remain apart and focus on the city seats while they're apart. I'm told, though, Susan Lee, Karen, spoke to every member of the Liberal Party privately, every MP and senator, to canvass their views over the last week or two before heading into the end of this negotiation. What do you think about where she has landed?
Well, I mean, I wonder if it strengthens her position or not. You know, like, would you trust David Littleproud? Remember that David Littleproud said there can't be a coalition under Susan Lee's leadership. So you have to ask whose interests he's serving in coming back together. And also, you know, it's one thing to punish them for 6 weeks. Well, where does that leave the General Convention about shadow cabinet solidarity? What happens next time? Is this the new standard that you get a 6-week rap on the knuckles? You can separate from shadow cabinet decisions or not.
So apparently they're going to codify this shadow cabinet solidarity, write it down. This hasn't happened before, so it's very clear. Does that help? Does that overcome the trust issue after 2 splits?
So that means that next time they can't do this. Is that right? Is that what David Littleproud is going to agree to? A 6-week penalty now, and then next time they won't do this again?
I think codifying that the National Party can't do what they did here and come to a different conclusion. Only the joint party room can do that, so that it's written down.
It kills off the idea of kind of national party room supremacy, which David Littleproud emphasises as this new notion that the National Party sets its own path. Well, no, you're in a coalition. There is a joint party room. That is what the Liberals hope to codify.
Yeah, at the end of the day, though, Karen, your point, can the rest of us trust that these two are going to stick together?
Well, it's happened twice now in 9 months, and David Littleproud was pretty emphatic. You know, there are all sorts of colourful stories about the kinds of language that is used in discussions between the two of them in private. He doesn't appear to like her very much. So is this a sustainable arrangement going forward? I wonder.
If they do stand up today, which they may, and announce this reunification, they'd be very wise to not, you know, put their arms around one or the other, because this looks absurd. To have fought this hard for 2 weeks. In that call that you mentioned, Karen, Sam Maiden reported that David Littleproud shouted down the phone at her 2 weeks ago saying, resign, resign, resign. I've also heard from Nationals that she rebutted back at one point and said, look, if you're going to reflect on my leadership, I might reflect on yours, and you might have won the leadership ballot, but Matt Canavan runs your party. So these two people don't see eye to eye, and it can't be credible that they're going to work closely together.
No, it's a good point. This is to be announced today, we're told, but I don't know if they'll stand together for the announcement.
There's no love lost there, is there?
No, there's not. Yeah. Look, I want to come back to what all of this means as to where the Conservative side of politics is left after this whole episode, and what's happening on the leadership front for Susan Lee in this coming week as well. But before we hear from the Treasurer, John, interest rates and the rise there. I mean, the Coalition couldn't make much of it in Parliament this week with the distractions on their side, but this is a pressure point clearly for Jim Chalmers and the government. The big question, who is to blame for the rise in interest rates?
Well, I think the first thing to say is rising interest rates are not always necessarily a sign of a bad thing happening in the economy. It's generally the economy is strengthening. The problem in this case is that it's a reaction to inflation getting too high, and the economy can't grow sustainably more than about 2% these days because we've got a lot of productivity challenges. In terms of who's to blame, if you want to go to the politics of it all, I mean, There's a bit of blame to go around, I think. The Reserve Bank, I think with the benefit of hindsight, cut rates too much, too aggressively last year. It was only 3 times, but it does now look like after they have to reverse course only after 6 months after the last rate cut.
That's
unusual.
why it's less of a good sign about the economy.
But we should also remember at that time there was a lot of pressure from particularly people in the Labor side of politics arguing they were needed to cut interest rates. Jim Chalmers said they were smashing the economy. Wayne Swan, the ALP national president, said they were practising economic dogma. There was a lot of pressure on them to cut rates. Now, I know there's a question about government spending and its contribution. Is government spending the reason why the Reserve Bank raised interest rates? It's not the sole cause. There's a bunch of things going on in the economy, private sector, but it's probably not helping. It is at a 40-year high outside of the pandemic. Nominal spending's been growing at 8% last financial year, this financial year. I think most economists think that the government could be doing more to help the Reserve Bank, even though the government's not the sole cause of the inflation and the interest rate rise.
We'll come back to that. Time to talk to the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, and to take us there, here was the Reserve Bank Governor under questioning from the Liberals' Simon Kennedy on government spending.
Government spending affects aggregate demand, which is how you set interest rates, so it must.
Well, it does, as does private. I mean, it's
Well, that's and I'm just
part of aggregate demand.
I'm relieved to hear you admit that, because when I was listening to the Treasurer in Parliament here on Tuesday, when he said that, it didn't sound right to me.
I said that private sector demand and government demand altogether in aggregate demand is too high. That's our focus.
Treasurer Jim Chalmers, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much, David.
So when rates went up on Tuesday, you said government spending was not a factor in the decision. Was it a factor?
Well, David, our political opponents and their acolytes are deliberately and dishonestly trying to conflate 2 different things. The idea that public demand is part of aggregate demand is not contested by me or by anyone. The question isn't whether public demand can create inflationary pressures. The question is whether it did towards the end of last year, pushing up inflation higher than anyone would like and causing the Independent Reserve Bank to hike interest rates during the course of last week. Now, the point that the Governor made on Tuesday and again on Friday, the point that I've made consistently throughout the week is that the thing that surprised the Reserve Bank on the upside towards the end of the year was the recovery in private demand. The Reserve Bank Governor actually pointed out that public demand retreated quicker than they were anticipating. Now, for some reason, this has not been mentioned, either in the clip that you just played or in the stories that we've been reading in recent days, but that is a fact. The Reserve Bank Governor has said that private demand accelerated faster than they thought, public demand retreated faster than they thought, and that's the point that I've been making.
But just so people aren't confused here, public demand, government spending, was still increasing, wasn't it, in the second half of last year?
No, public demand growth last year was slowing. It was less than a third of what it was the year before.
Public demand growth, but public spending, government spending, was growing.
Well, in both of our budget updates, David, we actually improved the budget in both instances. What matters is the contribution that public demand growth is making. The Reserve Bank Governor and myself have both made the same point, that public demand growth was slowing at the same time as private demand growth was gathering pace.
Yeah.
Now, once again...
Sorry, I'll just try one more time, though. Public demand growth might have been slowing, but public demand itself was growing. That public spending was increasing.
No, but what matters, David, is the contribution that it's making to demand. And again, nobody sensible or serious is contesting that public demand is part of the aggregate demand calculation. But what matters is the contribution that it's making. Public demand was retreating, private demand was accelerating. The Governor made that point on Friday. Now, if you take this argument from our political opponents to its logical conclusion, then what they are conceding is that the policy that they took to the election for bigger deficits and more debt this year and next year would mean that inflation would be higher and interest rates would be higher had they won the election. The reason I'm making this point, David, is because the same people who are making this point now about public spending, inflation and interest rates weren't making this point last year when inflation was coming down quickly and the Reserve Bank cut interest rates 3 times. I have said throughout that the budget position is not the primary determinant of prices in the economy, but we can and will continue to play a helpful role in the fight against inflation.
Okay, let's just leave your opponents to one side for a moment. I just want to be very clear on this for viewers. You've said public demand was retreating, but public demand was also increasing. Is that right?
Well, not in the first 2 quarters of the year, David.
No, I'm talking about the second half of the year. This was September quarter.
Well, I'm referring to the point that the Governor made, David, which is that public demand was making a smaller contribution, private demand a bigger contribution.
But it was still growing. It was still growing is the point. I just want to be clear. You accept that it was still growing?
Well, typically it is growing. But what was unusual last year occurred in the first half of the year was when it was actually making a negative contribution. The big contribution was being made by the private sector. Again, this is not a political opinion, David. This is the facts that we saw in the national accounts and in other data.
And the facts are...
A fact which has been pointed to by the Reserve Bank Governor but ignored in the clip earlier and also in much of the coverage.
Okay, but public demand was growing in the period that we're talking about here, and that was a factor in pushing up inflation, correct?
It was shrinking in the first half of the year. In the second half of the year, it was making a much, much smaller contribution. The reason why we had inflation tick up higher than we'd like in the second half of the year was the acceleration in private demand, the end of the state-based energy rebates, some more persistent pressures in housing and in other areas as well. Now, these are economic facts which the Reserve Bank Governor and I have both pointed to.
No, I appreciate sticking to the facts. Which was growing faster, though, public demand or private demand in the second half of last year?
Private.
Was growing faster.
As a contribution to GDP, private was growing much faster.
But which was actually growing faster in and of itself?
Beg your pardon?
Which was growing faster, private demand or public demand?
Private demand was making a significantly bigger contribution in the second half of the year, and in the first half of the year, public demand was making a negative contribution.
Okay. Let's move to the broader issues the Reserve Bank has said in the Statement of Monetary Policy. It's not just interest rates going up, it also has a weaker outlook now for growth and for real wage growth as well. It is a pretty tough outlook for a lot of households out there. So what does the government do? Are more household rebates that you've gone with in the past the answer, or do you need a different approach now?
Well, this persistent inflation is not the sole influence on the budget we'll hand down in May, but it will be the primary influence, I think. We've got a situation where the economy more broadly is performing relatively well. We've got stronger growth and lower unemployment than almost all of the major advanced economies. We've got lower debt and stronger jobs growth than all of them. We haven't had a negative quarter of growth like they all have. And so the Australia's economy is performing relatively well, but we've got these 3 big challenges: inflation, productivity, and also this global economic uncertainty. And so I think the point that John Kehoe made on the couch a moment ago is relevant here. You know, a big objective of the budget needs to be and will be to lift the speed limit on the economy so that it can grow more strongly with lower inflation. That really is one of the primary motivations and objectives of the work that we're doing to put the budget together. The budget will be about productivity. We're working up a productivity package. There will be a savings package that we're working on. We'll consider whether more steps can be taken on tax reform. But overall, it will all be about lifting the speed limit on the economy, making sure we can grow quicker with lower inflation, attracting investment, dealing with intergenerational issues, and also continuing to get the budget in better shape.
All right, well, you've just given us a tease there of the budget. I've got a bunch of questions in my head now, Treasurer. Productivity, some spending reduction and tax reform coming in the budget. Can you give us any inkling into your thinking on productivity firstly? You did take some steps after your round table last year, but what are you thinking about to get productivity going, which is what all economists say we need?
Well, first of all, obviously we don't finalise the budget at the beginning of February. We finalise the budget at the beginning of May, but there's a lot of work going into another productivity package. You know, we've actually got a big and ambitious agenda on productivity already. You know, cutting nuisance tariffs, making approvals faster, environmental reform, foreign investment review board reform, competition policy, a national AI plan, and a lot of that action has happened since the reform roundtable that I hosted in the third quarter of last year. And so that work is ongoing. And it's a big influence on our thinking in the budget. And really the emphasis in the work we're doing for the budget is attracting more investment. I think if we attract more investment, we lift the speed limit on the economy, we make our economy more productive, more dynamic and more competitive, because that's the best way to lift living standards for more people into the future.
On tax, you flagged more tax reform coming in the budget. One measure you've already announced, you did a deal with the Greens on superannuation tax reform to hit the bigger accounts with a higher rate. When are you actually going to introduce the legislation for that?
Well, first of all, we're still talking to the Greens about that. Some of that engagement's happened at office level. We understand and recognise, obviously, that we don't have the numbers in the Senate to pass everything on our own, and so those discussions will be ongoing. I'm looking to introduce the Better Targeted Superannuation Concessions Bill on Wednesday, if I can, certainly this week. And that bill is all about making the superannuation system fairer from top to bottom. It's about maintaining concessional tax treatment in super across the board, but boosting super for people with low balances and making the tax concessions more sustainable for people with millions and millions of dollars in their super.
What about capital gains tax, the discount that's there? Will you be winding back the capital gains tax discount?
Well, as the Prime Minister's made clear, I think in the Parliament and certainly yesterday in Perth, we've got a tax policy already, and the major part of that is cutting income taxes 3 times. That is the primary focus of our efforts when it comes to tax. Now, we do acknowledge more broadly that there are intergenerational issues in housing and in tax, but we are dealing with those intergenerational issues in other ways. In the housing system by building more homes and making it easier for people to save a deposit. In the tax system by cutting income taxes 3 times, making superannuation tax concessions more sustainable, boosting low income superannuation. All of these efforts in tax and in housing are about understanding and recognising and acknowledging we do have these intergenerational pressures, and the government is serious about dealing with them.
But on the capital gains tax discount, I think it was the Parliamentary Budget Office pointed out, about 60% of the benefit of this goes to the top 1% of taxpayers. Is that a problem for you?
Well, first of all, we release our own analysis, the Tax Expenditure and Insight Statement, and that's provided a number of, some analysis that's not inconsistent with the conclusion of the Parliamentary Budget Office. As I said, we've got a tax reform agenda. It's primarily focused on cutting income taxes.
But is that an equity problem for you, this concentration of the benefit going to the very top, the wealthy getting the lion's share?
Well, when we consider next steps in tax reform, obviously issues around intergenerational equity are front and centre. We said in and around the reform roundtable, certainly in its immediate aftermath, I know that there are intergenerational issues in housing and in tax. We've got a big agenda to deal with those issues already, and any further steps that we would take to address some of those intergenerational equity issues would be a matter for Cabinet. And I mention that because not to be evasive about this, but we take our collective decision-making in the Albanese government seriously. Any further steps would be a matter for Cabinet, but we've already got a big agenda on tax and housing, and the focus is on rolling that out.
Can you at least say you won't do anything that's retrospective, that's going to hit existing investments?
Well, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals on a policy that we don't have, David.
All right.
Obviously, any government that considers these kinds of steps would work out whether any transitional arrangements are required, and if so, what they look like. But we haven't changed our policy, and so I'm reluctant to go into those kind of details.
Look, a couple of other issues, Treasurer. That alleged terror attack on an Invasion Day rally in Perth. Can you understand why some Indigenous Australians are angry that more hasn't been done to tackle the racism they've been facing?
Well, I think it's a reminder that terrorism and hate speech takes a number of forms, and the response from state and federal police and ASIO to that outrageous act of terrorism in WA was swift, but we do understand that people are edgy and for good reason right now. And we've got a big agenda when it comes to cracking down on hate speech, cracking down on terrorism, but we know that the nature of that evolves over time, and so will our response.
I mean, it's more than a year now since the Race Discrimination Commissioner presented his anti-racism framework to the government. Still no response. Is it time for the government to at least provide a response?
Well, first of all, it wouldn't be right to say that we haven't been working on and rolling out updates to the hate speech regime and the like. But obviously when it comes to that report, anti-racism report, we're working through the recommendations. We take these challenges to social cohesion incredibly seriously. We know that hate speech and terrorism takes many forms and that our response needs to as well. And that report will be an important input as our response evolves.
And look, Israel's President Isaac Herzog arrives in Australia tomorrow. He's here, of course, to comfort Jewish Australians after the Bondi atrocity. But we know protests over the war in Gaza will take place. Is this visit, do you think, going to help social cohesion in Australia?
Oh, look, I understand that this visit is contentious and it will invite a range of views, and some of those views will be strongly held. But this is about grieving with the families and loved ones of the 15 souls that were thieved on Bondi Beach. And so I hope that any protests that take place are peaceful and lawful when he's here in Australia.
And Treasurer, before I let you go, the news this morning of the coalition reuniting, a reaction from you, does it change much for the government?
I think these endless cycles of bust-ups and patch-ups are fooling nobody. You know, that no amount of fake smiles for the cameras today can cover up for the fact that the right of politics in Australia is now a three-ring circus. It's a three-ring circus of petty, personal and internal rivalries. And I think anyone who thinks that this is the end of it is kidding themselves.
Jim Chalmers, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, David.
Coming up, we'll have more on the visit of the Israeli President Isaac Herzog. First, let's bring in our panel again. We're joined by political journalist and author Karen Middleton, John Kehoe, the economics editor for the Australian Financial Review, and Paul Sakkal, chief political correspondent with the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Karen, just to pick up on what we heard from the Treasurer there on interest rates, he is still very much playing down the role government spending, the government he has played in pushing up rates.
Yes, he is. He's conceding that, you know, government spending plays a role, but he's saying it was not the driving force. It's interesting that he said that it will not be the sole focus of the budget to deal with inflation, but it will be one of the roles of the budget, and that suggests some kind of pulling in of the belt, right? You know, something that is going to rein in spending in some way.
He's really laid out here the framework for the budget, John. Productivity, spending restraint and tax reform. That's a high bar, do you think, at this point to be setting?
Well, I think the proof will be in the eating. I mean, they're three good themes, I think, for any budget, particularly a first budget back after an election. That is the opportunity for any government, really, to make some difficult decisions, implement a reform agenda, and we need to sort of see some meat on the bones of all of that. Around the tax sort of stuff, he was a bit careful not to lean in too hard on this media reporting by my colleague Phil Curry around possible changes to capital gains tax, but it does seem like it's on the table when he's talking about intergenerational issues, but wants to go through a cabinet process around that sort of stuff as well. So it does feel like it's in the frame, but not completely ruling it in at the moment, obviously.
Well, clearly it feels like it's more than in the frame.
Yeah.
I mean, all week and including there, the Treasurer is very much leaving it open. Acknowledging that, yeah, their own numbers show that it's a benefit that's concentrated at the very top of the income ladder, and that they are looking at tax reform in the budget.
Yeah, and that phrase John just mentioned, they keep on using again. They've used it in the past. They're using it a lot now. Intergenerational equity. You know, that is fairness to young people. That is often associated with the housing problem, and so that is hinting that they're looking at something like that. You know, there are people privately still not ruling out looking at the negative gearing thing either. But I would have thought that is much more politically problematic for the government to tackle than the capital gains tax, because the capital gains tax discount issue affects people when they sell a property, whereas the negative gearing concessions benefit people while they still hold the property.
The question is, though, like, you can look at that in isolation, but really, if you're going to help intergenerational equity, it's going to take a whole host of things. You've got to get the economy growing fast with productivity, living standards. And what are they going to do if they wind back some of the discount on negative gearing, on capital gains? Is that going to fund some income tax cuts? Is it going to be broader reforms? Because you can't look at this in isolation. You've got to look at it as a package. And what is this overall? I mean, there's also the debt situation for younger people. The best way you can probably help younger people is reduce their income taxes and also make housing more affordable, sure, but also you don't want them inheriting a lot of debt down the track as well.
What has Bill Shorten always said? I mean, he went to the 2019 election with a whole raft of these tax changes, negative gearing, capital gains tax, franking credits, and the money was to go into education and health. And he's acknowledged since then you'd be better off putting that back into people's pockets through income tax reduction.
My colleague Shane Wright reported last week that the government is considering the capital gains tax discount reform as part of a broader package that might include bigger income tax cuts that go beyond what they offered before the election. The intergenerational equity theme was meant to be the cornerstone of the Prime Minister's press club speech, which was meant to be delivered around Australia Day. It got pushed out because of Bondi and various other things. So they're gearing up and setting the kind of scaffolding of the argument in place to do something significant on CGT and probably something broader in the budget.
If it is just capital gains tax change, it may not make a big difference to the budget bottom line or indeed the housing market, as plenty have pointed out during the week. But is it about is it about the symbolism here, saying to younger voters, we see you and we acknowledge this intergenerational inequity?
Well, it's also been a thing that's been a thing for Labor for a long time, and as you said, Bill Shorten had it as part of his suite of policies in 2016 and 2019, and they've got this golden opportunity now. They've got a huge majority. They've got an opposition in complete disarray. Yep. There is now an expectation generally, I think, in the community, not even just among their own constituents, that they should be doing something substantive with this. I think they will need to make some serious changes to prove that they're a government with a plan, and this is the opportunity to do it. It's the second year of the term. This is the year to make the hard choices. This is the time to do it.
Even if it's a big reform budget and it's gearing up that way, and that will be laudable, this government's cruel by its actions to date. I mean, the Treasurer there doesn't have a set of answers that he can give you, David, to say how they've taken money out of the economy to get the whole place working in a way where if you get a little bit of growth, it doesn't heat up too strongly and the RBA is not forced to increase rates. I mean, yes, he can point to private demand being more significant than public demand, and that's true, but the government's fiscal stance has been expansionary for a year and maybe 2 years at the same time as the RBA has been trying to cool the place down, and they've done not a whole lot on the productivity front. So you can only do so much in one budget. These things take time. Yep. We've got a forecast for low growth, high inflation, and that's difficult for a government.
But we need to see how it all fits together. So they're not just piecemeal decisions. They've been forced in some respects into, not piecemeal, but into decisions because of the state of the economy on energy rebates and the like. Yep. That forced their hand a bit. Now we need to see what is the whole picture. How are you going to fix the economy moving forward?
Yeah, I think we need to move on from what Jim Chalmers has sort of talked about, bite-sized chunks on tax reform. Yeah. That doesn't really work. That's death by 1,000 cuts. I think politically, economically, it doesn't do much. I'd be interested to see if they go to more of the Paul Keating, Bill Kelty model. Okay, if you're going to have the Bill Shorten tax increases on things like capital gains or trusts, negative gearing, franking credits, not saying Labor's going to do all that this time, probably not. The whole idea is to use some of that money to reduce income taxes to help the younger working age people. And is Labor going to reverse course and do that this time? Because they didn't last time.
Yeah, tax income less and capital more, essentially, to ease the burden on the working age population. What about the opposition in all of this? What are they saying about the idea of touching capital gains tax, and what are the risks for them, do you think?
Well, they've come out opposing capital gains tax changes, as have John Howard and Peter Costello, who brought in the discount in 1999 in the AFR weekend, basically saying this will just be an excuse to paper over Labor's spending increases. So that will be their line of attack, that it sort of hurts aspiration, people who want to get ahead by investing and those sorts of things. So there is going to be, I think, a political divide between Liberal and Labor on this. And look, the intergenerational line from Labor is probably quite a powerful political tool if they can sell it well. So the coalition, or if they get back together, are going to have to come up with a good counter-narrative.
There was a group of Liberal backbenchers last term under Dutton, Keith Wallahan, some of the others who represent city-based seats who are a younger demographic, who were pushing for negative gearing and capital gains tax reviews. They were quickly slapped down by the older generation of Liberals who reflexively back the boomer class. So I think the Treasurer and the Prime Minister would know that the Liberals will be wedged on this, and it's a dangerous game for them.
And I do wonder if some of the potency has been taken out of the aspiration argument because the problem is now, and there's such an accepted problem with housing in particular, but that this generation coming through has such a struggle that maybe talking about the future doesn't have the same impact that it did. People want something done now.
Just quickly on a policy point versus the political symbolism and all, we shouldn't pretend though changing capital gains or even negative gearing for that matter is going to make much difference to house prices. I mean, even the Treasury senior official that sent an estimates late last year said all the research shows it adds about 1 to 4% to house prices combined, and now we're only talking about the CGT discount, maybe winding it back a little bit. So I just hope that this doesn't become sort of a symbol panacea to fix housing affordability. Really, it's not going to make much difference. It's more the political signal and symbolism of it.
Yeah.
And the supply side is much more important, building more homes.
It probably depends how you do it. Whether you do apply it retrospectively to all existing investments, I'd say that's unlikely, but there's different ways you could do this, or really narrowly target it at existing homes, new investments. All right, well, despite, of course, the political sting of a rate rise, the government did seem to find some comfort revelling in the opposition's misfortune.
I thank the leader of one of the three far-right parties in this country for his question. Can't hear you back there. I can't hear you back there.
For goodness sake. The only cost of living issue they're interested in talking about is the cost of living with each other.
Several members were yelling, time.
I do encourage my people to not yell out time. There's enough behind her doing that at the moment.
They make the Beckhams look like a happy family.
The great pretender to the throne, the member for Hume, who inexplicably remains on the front bench, Mr Speaker.
I want everyone to show each other respect.
One of the problems with them not talking to each other over there is that his mate over there just asked the same question. I thank the Shadow Treasurer, Mr Speaker, who is also now, I'm told, the Shadow Assistant Treasurer. They found the only bloke over there who could work with him, Mr Speaker. And they're still not convinced there won't be leaking of private conversations.
Karen, there's some funny lines there. But
I think Ted O'Brien was saying, I'll pay that.
I'll pay that one. Did the government need to be a little bit careful of hubris?
Yeah, you don't want to overplay your hand. I think they got away with it because they were clever and they didn't overcook it. But if you kept on about doing that, I think you would look a bit gratuitous. Yeah.
So let's come back to where all of this, what this means for the Conservative side of politics. Part of the big problem, I think we all agree, is this difficulty for the Liberals and Nationals in identifying what they stand for, who they want to be, who they want to reach and represent. Coming back together, does this help, Karen, or does that big problem still remain?
Well, as I said earlier, I'm not sure that we've resolved the problem. I'm not sure that the fundamental differences have changed at all. The things that they disagree on, they still disagree on. So how is this coalescing around a common set of values? Where are those values? And I think they've been obscured, particularly for the Liberal Party, and that's the great dilemma for people in the Liberal Party. Historically, they have found common ground and they've been able to work together, and even the Liberal Party is riven within itself now, Conservatives and moderates.
Well, even on this issue that they split over, the hate groups law,
yeah.
What's their position going to be on that?
Well, and also
they undo it.
Was that the issue that they wanted to end the entire, 8-decade-long coalition on? Really? That's the issue? I just think there's a lot more work to be done yet, and I wonder whether the work needs to be done separately in the two parties before it can be done together. I don't know, but we're a long way from a cohesive body that could run the country, I think.
Paul, explain to us the dynamic that Susan Lee's been facing through this period, the internal dynamic in the Liberal Party to get back together or to stay apart, and where does this leave her leadership?
Well, the moderates in the party, particularly city-based moderates, have no time for the Nationals. They blame them for shifting the party to the right, and they were keen for a longer split. Most of the MPs in the middle of the party and on the right know that a cohesive coalition is critical to winning elections. And even if there's a whole bunch of personality and policy differences that will persist and will cause complication, a united coalition means that there are not three right-wing parties competing for votes in an election, being One Nation, the Liberals and the Nationals, which would be a total disaster for Conservative politics. It does allow the coalition to now, if there is some clear air for Susan Lee, to put out a migration policy and to come together and put some ideas forward on how they counter One Nation, which is causing turmoil.
The migration policies are a doozy for them, though, because yes, there's a lot of pressure from One Nation and the Conservatives to go hard on what they call mass migration, but there are moderates who are very worried about the message this is sending to migrant communities who've been deserting the Liberal Party, and explain a lot of their losses in the cities. So landing that one won't necessarily be easy either.
No, and we've seen in the past when it came to the Chinese community that arguments being put in the context of foreign policy about China were received in the Chinese Australian community as criticisms of Chinese Australians, and often on the ground it gets its permission to be prejudiced against particular members of particular communities, and certainly there'll be Australians worried about that happening again if we have permission to attack migration generally and particular groups. I think
and
that's
the
a
business
problem.
community too, John, will be making very clear to the Liberals that migration's pretty important to them.
Yeah, particularly for sectors like home building, where there's already a shortage of tradies. I think Angus Taylor has actually mounted an argument that we need to really focus much more on skilled migration in Australia to lift productivity and those sorts of things. So while you might be able to reduce the overall number, if you have a laser-like focus on very skilled migrants from around the world, Australia's a very attractive destination. I think that resonates, and there's something behind that.
Susan Lee, bottom line, does she survive this week? Is she given another several weeks, months, right through to the budget, or is there going to be a challenge from Angus Taylor this week?
I was reading a study from a few weeks ago which showed that political punditry over a long period of time is no better than a roll of the dice. So, take this with a big grain of salt. But Susan Lee, the numbers in the party room are very close. Yeah. There's 1 or 2 votes in it. If Angus Taylor was to push forward this week, there's a chance he'd win it, but it might be tight. Angus Taylor's a more cautious character than some others in the right. He wants to move at a pace to ensure that this gets done with a decisive victory. That's not ruling out this week. There is still a possibility that the coalition deal is viewed as fragile and that now is the time to strike. He'll be criticised if he doesn't, because he's got an opportunity now. But his team, in terms of the people in the war room doing the numbers for him, is not big. There is not a huge level of factional clout behind Taylor. The right is split. There is a group of hasty supporters who are quite despondent with how the last few weeks has played out. And Susan Lee, for all her difficulties leading the party, does have a small but savvy group of operatives behind her and MPs who are not going to let this go out, let this die without a massive fight.
You would think that this buys her some time, this coming back together of the coalition, but who knows?
There's a poll out tonight or tomorrow morning in the papers too, which might have a bit of influence
to
see how bad the numbers are for the Liberals or the coalition.
Exactly. You've also got the Israeli president turning up, and do the Liberals really want to be changing their leader, early in the week while the president is here on what's being described as a pastoral visit that they were very strong advocates for?
Yeah, but didn't they break apart on the day of mourning for?
That's right.
So there's a precedent for that. Yeah.
There's a fair bit of tunnel vision in there.
Yeah. Well, the alleged attempt to bomb an Invasion Day rally in Perth, as we discussed with the Treasurer, has now been declared a terror attack. For many, though, questions are being asked about how the country has responded.
This was alleged terrorism driven by racism and hatred.
It is what we've been saying it was all along.
This alleged event has provoked anxiety, shock and concern in our Indigenous communities.
The device did not detonate, but that does not change the fact that this attack was real.
What could have been a horrible situation here, I must say there was a deadly silence.
The Australian Federal Police, the WA Police and ASIO worked immediately to assist to keep Australians safe.
We know how silent this country went. Everyone went into hiding. The media, you guys.
I think that we give our police and our authorities the space to do their job.
While it's
frustrating. There have been circumstances with this event where authorities had to take their time.
It will be a difficult time for Indigenous Australians, and we stand with them at this time.
Karen, the point from Lydia Thorpe and others is that this sort of racial hatred really hasn't been treated seriously enough. It's been terrible since the Voice referendum defeat. Is there a point there, do you think?
Yes, I think so. I'm sure, well, I know that there is a process to be followed before you determine something a terrorist act. So there is often a little bit of a lag when that occurs. I think that happened with the Bondi Junction assessment, and then the other event in the Muslim preacher who was attacked. There was a hesitation there. They wanted to check the facts. However, I think there was a bit of a sense that, you know, this was something that didn't happen, and maybe there's a bit of a hangover of the Dural caravan. Let's not get ahead of ourselves here. And the consequence is that it seemed like it wasn't being taken as seriously. I'm curious about the language the Prime Minister, and in fact the opposition leader, used in the Parliament. They're still calling it an alleged terrorist event. I mean, it's been declared a terrorist incident. So I'm not sure why the word alleged is being added there. It does still sort of add a caveat, and it was interesting to me that when the Treasurer spoke to you about it a few minutes ago, he called it an outrageous act of terrorism. So he didn't use that caveat. I don't know whether there's something about it in the Parliament, the advice they've been given, but there's a difference in the way they're talking about it.
Yeah. Has there been a difference, or any grounds, do you think, to criticise the Prime Minister's handling of this, Paul? I mean, he points out that he spoke about it day one, he spoke about it in Parliament after the declaration of a terrorist incident was made.
I think he has a leg to stand on with those arguments. And on the whole, over the last few years, I think what we've seen is police forces across the country, including the AFP, grappling with new, quick-moving, complex forms of extremism, be it a rise in white nationalism, a rise in anti-Semitism, which we see play out weekly now. We live in such fractured times, and our police forces, and you see this now with additional resourcing, which I expect will just grow in coming years, additional resourcing to put education into police forces around how extremism looks. I mean, there were lots of squabbling between Victoria, New South Wales and the federal police about enforcing hate symbols laws at pro-Palestinian protests.
That's
because
right.
at some of them there were Hezbollah flags and Iranian flags and Hamas adjacent flags, and state police said, we don't know what these flags look like, we don't know what to do. So it looks like the WA police will learn some lessons out of this, that the perpetrator does appear to be a white nationalist, and our police forces are just trying to learn how to deal with this new environment.
Alleged perpetrator.
Yeah, that's where alleged does come in, yeah.
All right, final one. The Israeli President Isaac Herzog is due to arrive in Australia tomorrow, but his 4-day visit at the invitation of the Prime Minister is drawing criticism and the prospect of mass protests.
President Herzog is being invited to Australia to honour the victims of Bondi.
To be completely frank, I'm very uncomfortable.
We have families mourning, and this was a request from the Jewish community.
He's come here in the context of the worst terrorist attack on Australian soil.
Genuine concerns about his potential complicity in war crimes.
I find it hard to reconcile the images I've seen of him signing bombs that were then dropped on Palestinian homes.
The Jewish community is in mourning. Australians are in mourning. Don't re-traumatise the Jewish community.
President Herzog has full immunity.
So it doesn't matter if he's an accused war criminal, wouldn't matter if he's complicit.
I understand there is animosity in some sections of the community towards President Herzog. It's inappropriate that puts community safety at risk.
People want innocent lives to be protected, whether they be Israeli or Palestinian, but they want something else as well. They don't want conflict brought here.
So Ed Husick, as you saw in that, suggests that the President signed a bomb that was dropped on Palestinian homes. President Herzog told Matthew Knott in your paper, Paul, over the weekend that it wasn't a bomb, it was a smokescreen shell, but he agrees in hindsight it was lacking taste and an error, which was an interesting concession. Look, the tensions around this visit are clear. How do you think the government is going in navigating these tensions?
Well, I think the judgment on the government that they're trying to portray this visit as appropriate, but at the same time not talking up Herzog as a figure of, you know, they're not doing anything to lean into this being a kind of state visit or anything of the sort. Sorry, I didn't explain that very well, but Isaac Herzog won't be delivering a speech in the Parliament.
Yeah.
He also won't be sitting in the seats behind the backbenches, which sometimes visitors are allowed to do as a sign of warmth. The government is very keen to put a cordon around this visit. He'll be visiting families in Bondi. The Prime Minister will be joining him. The government is trying to get through this with the view that there's only a small section of the community who is interested in it, but that's a very loud section of the community as well, and it'll be a fractious time, and people on both sides of this debate have lost the ability to talk to each other.
It's not saying don't protest, but it is saying don't break rules, don't get violent. They expect protests, but they want this to be respectful.
Yeah, I mean, people are entitled to their views, absolutely, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact the purpose of his visit primarily is to acknowledge and mourn what happened at Bondi, where Jewish people lost their lives. There was Israeli citizens injured as well, and we know also that there's been a rift between Anthony Albanese and Benjamin Netanyahu too, and perhaps his presence here might go some way to improving relations between Australia and Israel too.
Well, and to that point, remember that Isaac Herzog was once a Labor politician, so he's a president, which is often described as an apolitical position in Israel, although, we saw that picture of the signing of the shell, which wasn't ideal, and he's made some comments that other people have criticised as well. So his visit here is very tricky for the government, but they do have a history of relationship with him as an individual. So they have to just manage the next few days, hope nothing terrible occurs, hope they can get through this, and then be confident that we move past this pastoral visit and things come back to focus on the domestic economy.
I think a couple of state Labor MPs have said they'll join the marches over this, but federally, Ed Husic we saw concerned. Is this creating much internal division in the federal Labor caucus?
We saw Anne Ali, the multicultural minister, not endorse his visit at one point and then put a clarifying statement out sometime afterwards. So it wouldn't surprise me if there was a sense in some parts of the left on the backbench that this was not ideal. But I think most people in the government would know this is not in any way the same as it would be if the government invited the Israeli Prime Minister. Herzog is not part of the military chain of command. He's not responsible for policy decisions. This is not a state visit, and I think most reasonable people...
He has endorsed what Israel's doing, though.
He's not criticised any part of the war effort, and he says that it's necessary. That's right. As head of state, that's all he could be asked to do. I mean, Sam Mostyn, our Governor General, would not be out there criticising any Australian military efforts. It's not his role. I think people in the government would hope that there is generosity on the part of the people who are planning to protest towards the Bondi families who are hoping to see the figurehead of the Jewish state come to help them mourn. It's just worth remembering that this is one of the worst massacres of Jews in or outside Israel for decades. The Israeli state, not through a political lens, wants to mark this. The families want to feel that from the Jewish state, and you'd hope that there is a level of generosity, but the level of vitriol does go to show how damaged perceptions of Israel have become because of the way Netanyahu has carried out this war effort.
Just to make a quick point, though, remember Sam Mostyn is not an elected person in our country, and the President of Israel is an elected person. Yeah.
All right, our panel, Paul, Sakkal, John Kehoe and Karen Middleton, back shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for the New Daily. I'm talking pictures this morning with Chief Political Analyst for the Australia Institute and contributing editor to the New Daily, the one and only Amy Remeikis, and a very warm welcome.
It's lovely to be here, thank you.
The RBA has raised interest rates, Amy, but it's not in everyone's interests, and I do love this Brett Lethbridge. It's start of February, pinch and punch, first of the month. And the great thing about pinch and punch is there's another one next month.
Yes, isn't it? Jim Chalmers is feeling a little bit bruised at the moment.
Megan Herbert, as she always does, really packs a punch. Well, sweetheart, we would buy you new shoes, but high-income families have been spending more and increasing pressure on the low-income families. It's the only way to make them stop. Cheer up, it's good for the economy.
That's the real pain behind all of this. And when you look at the data, all of this was happening because of data centres and also, you know, big overseas on big holiday trips in December, which is not something that families like this are experiencing.
I did love Jim Chalmers in the House. He looked at times like he was trying to do Jedi mind tricks. You will not discuss interest rates.
I think what was really getting Jim Chalmers was having to answer so many questions from Ted O'Brien, which is maybe his least favourite thing. He was doing a lot of this, a lot of the,
God.
Let me talk you through the economy.
Warren Brown has picked up on the fact that there probably would be even more scrutiny if it wasn't for the catastrophe that is going on within the coalition. The sideshow alley here is the farmer wants a wife. No, he doesn't. Yes, he does. No, he doesn't.
Look, I think the interest rates did get quite a lot of scrutiny. I just think that it wasn't coming from within the parliament.
There may be challenging times ahead for the Liberals, but Susan Lee is still life of the party.
Look, she is nominally still the leader.
I don't know who organises the seating, but placing David Littleproud when he moved from the front bench to the back right behind Angus Taylor was just delicious.
Just the empty shadow front bench.
There's no one on the hook anymore.
No, and you know, well, there's quite a few people on the hook, but nobody on the actual hook of the front bench.
Of the front bench. Andrew Hastie took a copy of Sun Tzu's The Art of War.
You know, nothing says like I'm moving on with my life than, you know, going back to a Chinese general's way of explaining war to the people who do not understand war.
Mark Knight has drawn Susan Lee doing the Champions Walk at the Australian Open.
And I'm not sure she's come up with the recipe for success just yet.
Amy, not only has the coalition split, but they're also facing a fair challenge from Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party. Lovely David Rowe. Pauline, please explain, coming soon to a chip shop near you as she's sitting on the hate chair.
That is something that Pauline Hanson sits in quite proudly at times.
I did love this Matt Golding cartoon. I believe we are in danger of being swamped by disaffected coalition MPs.
Yes. So I believe that was also one of the points that Tony Burke was making as leader of the House when he was telling those on the crossbench to be careful what they wish for.
Amy, it's been a great pleasure unpacking events this week, and it's great to have you on.
Thank you. Back to you, Spearsy.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Mike. A quick plug for the podcast, which is now back. We got more details this week of the Thriving Kids program for kids who aren't put on the NDIS, and the final report of the government's advisory group was released. The co-chair of that advisory group, Professor Frank Oberklade, spoke to me for the podcast. So if you're interested in how Thriving Kids is meant to work, when it is up and running, have a listen to that. Final observations, Paul.
The Socceroos play the USA in the World Cup in June in Seattle. There is a sense that the US President Donald Trump will be active in and around the World Cup because he's got this unusual and close relationship with FIFA. And there are some in the Australian soccer community as well as the US-Australia diplomatic world who hope that the Prime Minister makes his way up there to meet Trump in and around the World Cup.
Interesting. John.
David, I think the Liberals and the Coalition more broadly not only really need to sort out their leadership situation, but also what does the party and or the Coalition actually stand for these days? Are they the party of Howard and Costello economically, or are they going to morph into some sort of more economically populist sort of outfit? The country's got a lot of challenges at the moment: budget, productivity, living standards. Now we've got this renewed inflation challenge, and we really do need a strong, functioning opposition to not only hold the government accountable, but also to present a viable alternative government one day in the future. So they've got to get their act together.
Karen.
Just on the Libs and Nats and the relationship between David Littleproud and Susan Lee, the arrangements under the Coalition generally are that they don't run candidates against each other when there's an incumbent in a seat. So if there's a Liberal in a seat, the Nats don't run against them and vice versa until that candidate or that incumbent retires, leaves, quits the party, whatever, then they can contest the seat. Glancing back at history, it's worth looking at the fact that Susan Lee, when she won her seat in 2001, won it in a three-cornered contest. The seat had been held by the Nationals leader, Tim Fischer, and he retired, and she outpolled the Nationals candidate quite considerably in primary votes in that seat. So she won against the Nats. people have long memories, and sometimes these bitternesses have a legacy. And I'm sure there's an element of that she's holding a seat that the Nats held before.
Well, they're all friends again now. Karen, I don't know how you could possibly doubt that. All right, thank you all very much for joining us this morning. It'll be an interesting day ahead. Finally, the Liberal Party, well, desperately needs someone to fix its internal woes, but sadly for some, the most famous political fixer is ruling out a comeback. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
I have no intention to return to politics. I think my wife would have a lot to say about that. A lot. If she's watching now, she'd be thinking, no way. Expletive deleted.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.